Hey, it's Jackie. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'll be speaking with Emily, who's a therapist who shares her experience with motherhood, postpartum depression, and miscarriage. Hope you find value in her insights. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes.
Yeah.
On this rainy, gloomy day,
Yes.
have a nice conversation. Do you want to start off just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Emily, as you know, and I don't love to start with what I do for work because that's not all of who I am, but I am a therapist. And I've been counseling for about 7 years now, a little bit over that. And right now I run a private practice in town, a group practice. So we serve everything from individuals, couples, families, youth, a little bit of everything. And we have an awesome team of people. And I really love what I do. I love the client work. I love the team piece. And I just feel so, lucky to be in this position. And in addition to that, I'm a parent of 2 kids and also, a person who just, loves being a mom and also wife and friend to many. And
You're a busy lady.
I am a busy lady.
You are, yes.
Yeah.
I think that's why it felt good to have you on here with your experience and just your stance in the community and the fact that you give back in your own way and that I feel like you have a good story to share and a lot of life experience to bring. So, like I said, thank you so much for coming on here. And is there anything that you want to add to your...
I don't think there's anything particular to add, but I'm just happy to be here. My kids are 3 and 5, so one just started kindergarten, which is a whole emotional roller coaster, and then the other's 3, so she's in preschool, and they're just awesome.
And have you had your own private practice this whole time that you have been in counseling?
So initially when I started, I was working with child and youth mental health a little bit, and also in the school systems as a therapist, or not therapist, school counselor for a couple of years. And then before the pandemic, decided to go out into private practice. I loved working with kids and families. I still do. But I think in that work, I really realized the really impactful work you can do with adults and also parents in particular. And and I always say in my work with parents, it's so much more powerful and impactful if we can work together to help you navigate things with your child instead of having your child in front of me as the professional. If I can help parents feel empowered and feel grounded in what they're doing, that to me is also super rewarding. So I've merged more into working with adults in my private practice and still a couple of youth kind of case by case, but still with that family kind of concept in mind. And
was it was there any hang-ups or real challenges in making that transition to having your own private practice?
I don't feel like there wasn't anything it's a lot of work because you're going into business, so that's a lot of work in itself. So I first started as a sole proprietor, so I was kind of taking on my own clients and working with the people that I wanted to work with in that capacity. And then 2 years ago is when I started this group practice. Because I really wanted to have a really strong team component. That's something in the private practice world that we often miss, is having a group of people, just for the support, to run through cases, also for the clients in our community so they have choice in who they're seeing and options, I think is really super important. So I started the group practice about 2 years ago. My big goal, which was a little bit ambitious, a lot of things I try to do, was to not ever have any wait lists. And when I say that, I don't mean with a specific practitioner, but my hope was to always have enough practitioners that when a client comes through our door or wants to book a session, we always have someone available to see them, because I do think this whole world of waiting 6 to 12 months for mental health care is really dangerous. And usually when someone is looking for counseling, they're not, like they want it quite immediately, like within a week or two. They don't want to sit on a wait list because sometimes,
hand's out.
yeah, their hand is out,
help.
and sometimes they're in the midst of crisis or navigating some sort of big decision. So, yeah, to have to wait is like, it just feels kind of, yeah, wrong to me. Yeah, and with that, of course, like we're also like trying to grow to meet the demand of the community, and so that also requires some continued work. But
it's nice to know that there are so many people out there that are striving to get well and figure things out, and you know, that they're willing to take some help, and so glad to have you in the community providing it, and that's really amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So the podcast, Hold On to Your Heart. When you think of the phrase holding on to your heart, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. Firstly, when you said that, I overthought that phrase like 15 different times. I was like, what does this mean? Does this mean like self-care? Does this mean like protecting myself? What does it mean? And I think as I sat with some of the other questions you kind of mentioned are common to come up, I think the theme that really came up for me in my own life was self-compassion. So holding on to my heart feels like the me now can look back at all the different versions of myself or parts of myself in the past, in different times in my life that were good and bad and challenging, and yeah, look at those parts of me with a lot of compassion. Yeah, versus judgment or like, why did I do that? Or why didn't I reach out for help? Or what was that about? Just to be like, yeah, like the me who was navigating that then was obviously doing that for a reason. So just have compassion for her and all the different parts of her. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
So is there a time in your life where you felt like you needed to have a lot of self-compassion and maybe you couldn't, or
Totally.
you didn't?
Yeah. Yeah, because I was thinking about that, and there's like so many places we could go, right? I think one, really impactful part of my life, and actually has really fueled like my like current passion as a therapist in that like perinatal realm, was definitely my postpartum experience with my first son, or my first child. I only have one son. But yeah, I think looking back on it now, and it's funny because it's like, you're a counselor, how did you not know you were struggling? Like there's this judgmental part of me that can come up and be like, what's like, why didn't you go and get help when you needed it? But I think that's so common. Like sometimes when we're in the midst of struggle, like we're in the fog and it's so hard to actually see clearly and to know even what you need. So yeah, I think looking back on that time in my life, like, yeah, it was like, I mean, pregnancy is tough. I think no matter who you are, if you say you have a perfect pregnancy, that's wonderful, but it's still a really hard change, and the whole life change is just, it's huge. And then, yeah, like a really difficult traumatic birth with this little baby. And then I think sometimes like health professionals who mean really well, and they want to tell you all the like perfect things to do and the safe sleep and how often to feed and all of this. The system often is not set up to be protective of women's mental health and what women really need when they're going through this huge change. Yeah, so to bring this little baby home who I was told is going to be failure to thrive if you don't wake up and feed him every hour on the hour, and if he can't nurse, you have to pump and syringe feed him, and if he gets like yellow or lethargic again, you gotta rush him into the hospital. Like,
just drinking out a fire hose. Yeah,
and on top, like you're not allowed to sleep beside your baby. You have to swaddle them, put them on their back in the bassinet. Like, and these are all great things. Like this is like how research has evolved. But with that, also the pressure on parents, especially moms who are bringing babies home. Like, oh, like you feel like if you do one thing wrong, you're totally gonna screw everything up, and that so much is at stake. So it kind of, that was like my journey into motherhood, and it was hard. And and sorry, I'm trying to think where I was going with that.
Quick question. Did you use, like, I don't know too much about the maternity side of things, but did you just, like, did you go to the hospital with, like, or they call them midwives, like, did you use that?
So I had, like, yeah, like I had a physician who was assigned, because this was before the Encompass Center was in town. So I had a physician assigned to me, and but then with that, you never know who's gonna deliver your baby either. Yeah, and so I had like those regular follow-ups, and then even like when you go to public health, like when you're a new mom, they like do all these like screenings, and I remember going into it and being like, okay, like I know I'm a counselor, I know the screening they're gonna do, I know the scale that they're gonna use, and I don't like want to have to even entertain that, so I'm just kind of like, yes, I'm fine, it's okay, like it'll be good. And I think, yeah, it's so fascinating that even like when we're struggling, sometimes we deny it, or we like deny what we need, or we don't even maybe know, and it just feels so overwhelming to start. But yeah, I think like that journey into motherhood was really rough, and like looking back on it, I'm now like, and also supporting postpartum moms now years later, I'm like, yeah, it was not normal how much I cried and how much I like wanted to isolate, and like having constant intrusive thoughts, and like that's such a normal, or not normal, it's not a normal experience, it's not great, like that can actually be like a huge marker that your mental health is really declining. So looking back on it now, I'm like, wow, like you had some pretty bad like postpartum depression or anxiety, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I can like look back on that time and be like, why didn't you get help? Or like, why didn't you like do what was best for you and your family? But
is there a time that kind of stands out to like being like, wow, I might be struggling?
Yeah, there is a time. And I remember being in the shower, and first of all, it was really hard to go in the shower because I had this horrible intrusive thought. And like disclaimer about this, because sometimes talking about intrusive thoughts brings up intrusive thoughts for people. But yeah, I had this horrible intrusive thought that if I ever left my son in another room or out of eyesight, even if he was in a safe like pack and play or bassinet, that somehow in like the split second I was either on the toilet or in the shower, that someone was going to come into the house and take him. And that I just like, you play, intrusive thoughts are so intense, like you play it through to the end and you're like absolutely terrified, and it's followed by so much avoidance of everyday normal things that we need to do, like shower and yeah, eat and sleep and go to the toilet. Yeah, so I remember at that point being like, yeah, maybe this is like not good. Like maybe this isn't normal. Maybe this is like more than just a normal postpartum experience.
And did that intrusive thought, was that the one that kind of was on repeat, or were there kind of plenty of different ones that would weave through?
There were a lot, and mine were really themed around the safety of my baby. And yeah, it could be anything from like, I can't let someone else hold him because I could picture them dropping him and like me trying to resuscitate him. Like it's always so disturbing. Intrusive thoughts are never like, oh, what if they get a bad cough and like you need to take them to the doctor. It's always like death or like the worst possible thing, or like, yeah, someone stealing your child. Like it's always the most disturbing things you can imagine. And mine were all very like safety focused. And yeah, they got pretty intense.
Do you think it's like, is it the intrusive thoughts that create the postpartum anxiety and depression, or is it the depression and anxiety that creates the intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, I think, yeah, they kind of work in a bit of a circle, like, but I think initially it starts with like this huge life change and disruption. And so like this like really challenging birth, like looking back on that, I'm like, that was pretty scary. And then like followed by not sleeping because I was told to wake up my baby every hour, which also created a baby who needed, after he did get healthy, he woke up every hour because that was just normal for him. Mm-hmm. So it's like, you're never getting a full night of sleep. Like, and like, when you think about, I always like, I'm talking to postpartum moms about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like when you think about the bottom of the triangle, it's like eating, drinking, sleeping, like shelter. And so if one of those things is missing, like you're not going to be doing well as a human being. And so I think it was like there were some very basic needs not being met. There was already like, yeah, like I've always been a mildly anxious person. So that was coming into my journey too. And then a bit of a complicated birth, and then just like being a new mom and all of that was like just like a recipe for disaster. And yeah, and so intrusive thoughts are super common for women who do experience postpartum depression or anxiety. Like sometimes they're paired with that. Some people don't have them, but yeah, they can be so intense and like so disruptive to people's lives. Like people won't leave the house, or they won't ever let someone else hold their baby, or they won't go in a car because they're so scared. And it's, even if you know cognitively, like this is unlikely to happen, like what are the chances right at like the 5 minutes that I'm in the shower, someone's just gonna break into my house and steal my baby? Like that, you know, cognitively it's not likely, but your nervous system doesn't know that, and you're living in this state of hyperarousal, and it's just like, yeah, you feel like you're in fight or flight almost. And
can you tie that thought, is that so isolated to like your first son, or like could you tie that thought to have like thinking of something in your past before children, of like having some kind of theme around safety, or is that so of itself?
No, I do think there probably is a connection to the safety piece. I might need a second to think about that, Jackie. I think there's also, yeah, it's so hard to like answer these questions because I'm like, there's so many layers to the things that we struggle with as people. Like an obsession with like safety and security has always been a big theme in my life. So it was really, it made sense why that was like the fixation in motherhood. Because like, yeah, I grew up in a very loving home, but with very anxious parents. And I heard a lot of like, yeah, don't talk to strangers, don't like go swimming after you eat, don't do like, and it was like the motives were really loving, but for some kids, those kind of messages just stick. And I think out of that and other experiences, like, that I had over the years, like there was a part of me that developed this perspective that the world is inherently dangerous and that I'm not safe. And so that's definitely been a big theme that I've had to work through, like in my own therapy journey and journey of growth. Like, why do I perceive things always as a threat? Like, what's that about?
I can relate to it for sure.
Yeah. And for other people, it could be something completely different, right? Like, I know there's also another part of me that's like obsessed with like work, like a lot of us are, and like working really hard. And there's like a healthy level of that, right? And like creating a life and career you love. And then I think at some point you also have to ask yourself, is this about something else? Like, am I trying to prove my worth through what I'm doing? Is that like a bit of a deeper theme for me too? But
another one I can relate to very well.
Totally. Another common one, right? Yeah, a lot
thanks
of us
for sharing
can.
that.
Yeah.
When in the process of your first child and the postpartum anxiety, depression, you know, I think you kind of mentioned like wanting to have compassion, or looking back and wishing that you had. Like at that time, what was the critic saying to you? Like what was the non-compassion?
Yeah, it was saying, you should know what you're doing because you're someone who usually has it together. And it was also saying, and I think this is really important for any professionals out there listening, like that you're a professional, so you should be able to handle this. Because yeah, there is this other unspoken additional vulnerability of professionals reaching out for help too, right? Like, especially in a small town, and it's not that I hadn't reached out for help for other things in my life before, but it felt like, yeah, you love kids, you always wanted to be a mom, you're a counselor, you know this whole like what to expect postpartum, you have a good supportive partner, like you should be okay. And yeah, there was a little bit of that voice for sure of judgment. And even looking back, I have to be cautious to not have that part of me that says like, why didn't you just get help? Like judging that past version of myself. So I think holding on to my heart is more about having compassion for her, because I think at the time, like she was just in survival mode. Like she just like, yeah, felt lost, and she was sleep deprived, and she didn't feel like herself at all. And there were, of course, like beautiful and joyful moments too that sometimes made it hard to know how much she was really struggling, right? Like, because there often are a lot of highs and lows. There can be one moment where you're like, oh, I love this baby, this is amazing. And you're crying because you're so happy. Mm-hmm. And then like in the next moment, you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot like have anyone over because like, what if someone drops this baby? Or like, what if I, totally screw it up because I fall asleep with him in my arms or something like that, right?
So much pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure for sure.
Probably some grief in there, like from what things
totally.
were like to what they are now, and what a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When did you decide that you needed and chose to reach out for help?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Or did you? You must
Yes,
have.
I did. And you know when it hit, actually, so it wasn't immediately after. And I think this is also like a really common theme in my life and for a lot of people, that it's like you kind of come through the storm. And another thing that I recognized was just like to be able to find a counselor who was actually skilled in supporting someone postpartum that I didn't know and wasn't a colleague already or wasn't friends with in some capacity living in this small town. So to find that, and then often there's wait lists, right? Or they're you're waiting to get that support. So I don't think I even reached out immediately, because I will also do this thing where I'm often like, yeah, I'm just in the struggle right now, but next week this is gonna happen and I'll be okay. Or in 2 weeks, our schedule will change and we'll be okay. So I put it off and until something really kind of comes to fruition. And sadly for me, that wasn't until I decided to have my second child and ended up losing a pregnancy in the middle there and going through a whole other grief journey. And that just brought up so many feelings of what that meant too. And this whole story of becoming a mom. And I realized some old triggers kind of coming up from my first son and what I experienced with him and other past experiences in that. And that was when I was in grief, it really hit me. All those buried feelings come out where you're like, does anybody really care? Does anybody really get it? Or is anyone even gonna check in at the end of the day? Do people actually care, or do they just say they do, right? And that was definitely a time where I was like, okay, I am super struggling right now. I feel like nobody cares. I think, looking back, I was not graceful in how I handled that time of my life. I think and this is also what I think a lot of people experience in grief or trauma. You end up, when you're in the thick of it, burning a lot of bridges. And I did that with friends. I was angry at them for not checking in or for not being what I wanted them to be. And so I realized in that I was like, okay, I really need to go work through some of this stuff and stop struggling through it on my own, or just going to my partner. He's great and he's supportive, but he can only offer so much, right? That I could get from maybe seeking some more professional help. So that's when the big turning point, I think, was for me. It was after that where I was like, okay, there's clearly stuff I haven't worked through and it's time to do that.
So was it, were you carrying the baby for a while before you miscarried, or?
So I would have been approaching my second trimester at the time. And so it wasn't super late in the scheme of pregnancy loss by any means. But I just realized, I think, how much that impacted me. I've really come to understand in working with women who go through that, your experience with losing and it's unique for everyone. I've had clients who frame miscarriage or losing a pregnancy as oh, that was just the rotten egg, and now I can move on and try again or whatever. And then I have others who are that was my baby and they had a soul and they had a name and it's a really big ordeal. And for me, it was definitely impactful for sure. And I think after having one child that you love, you realize how much you lose when it doesn't work out, because you're oh, that was also their sibling, and what if it doesn't work out again? And that was a tough journey for me. And then I think another big common theme, and this is something I experience for sure, is when you go through that, you feel like your life is put on pause, and then it's really hard seeing other people's lives carry on. Other friends get pregnant, you know, people in your life get pregnant and their lives, it feels like, are moving along, and you're not where you're supposed to be. And so that's like another piece of the grief of it, is not just what you lost, but the timeline of your life and your sometimes like sibling gap, and what it kind of meant for your future too. And for me, it was like that felt like the final piece of my family. So it was like, oh, like if this doesn't work out, that would be pretty devastating. But but it's just part of my story too. And it was definitely a big time in my life where I was like, okay, it's time to open up the can of worms again and not be so afraid of what's going to come up. Like, I clearly needed to work through some stuff around that.
Well, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, it's super sad. And I wonder what, I really appreciate your vulnerability when you say burning bridges, when you're kind of in the thick of it and you're going through it. And I kind of just curious what that looks like. Like, I guess you said like people not showing up, or what did you want them to say? Like, what
it's so hard because I think sometimes you don't even know what you want, but it's like you have this expectation that people should support you somehow, even though, like, now also looking back on it, just like I've had self-compassion for me navigating these things. I have so much compassion for friends who didn't know what to say. And I think like looking back on it, I have a lot of compassion for the friends who said a lot of things that were well-intentioned but actually end up being hurtful, like using the word or the phrase "at least," like at least you're still young so you can get pregnant again, or at least you tried close enough together that you can still have a younger sibling and not have a huge age gap. And I think that it's just like very invalidating whenever we use that phrase with people, at least. Like, the intentions are good. But I also often, actually, another reflection on that is it often is a reflection of our own discomfort with people's emotions when we feel the need to have to, almost minimize what people are going through. So, I was definitely angry and sad and felt very alone. And I think I had expectations of certain people in my life who I was like, oh, this person will like text me throughout the week or stop in or whatever. And when they didn't, I was like just furious, which is like not normal to my character. I'm normally a pretty like patient, like kind of conflict averse kind of person. So like when some friends did start coming back, I was angry at them. And I remember confronting them and being like, where were you? Like, you're not a good friend if you're not there for me, or if you don't check in. And looking back on it, I'm like, okay, that was like a super angry part coming out to try to protect the hurt that I was feeling. And now I just, like when you, like, the good news is I think sometimes when you do burn bridges, like I call it that, but like when people do care about you, or when like they are invested in your life, like repair is also very possible. So those same people that I probably reacted pretty intensely to were also really understanding and forgiving. And we were able to repair those relationships. And I think people like that assumption. I think when we're going through things, like, there's like this thing in cognitive behavior therapy called negative thought distortions, where like if you're in a place of depression or grief, like the narratives or these like thoughts you tell yourself are quite extreme sometimes, like nobody cares, like I'm not important to people, like it doesn't matter if I'm here, like they go very extreme, versus like when we're in a more balanced place, we can see like people do care, but people are not perfect and we can't expect them to be everything to us, right? Like, even like really good friends are not, it's not their job to meet all of our needs. And sometimes I think we have to look outside of these individual relationships, whether it's like with your partner or your parent or your best friend, to get the support you really do need. And
So this kind of time was a good catalyst for you to kind of see how maybe unmanageable things were getting, and your
Totally.
expectations and your
Yeah.
maybe self-talk and all of it, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
you did reach out and go somewhere for help. Did you find somebody?
I did,
after-
yes. And I've had a couple of really great counselors over the years. And yeah, when I was able to return to work some of that stuff through with, and then I think with any sort of grief, also just like you need time, right? And to be really patient with yourself as you go through that, and to let yourself feel those feelings, whatever that looks like. If it's like taking time off work, or just like crying like every night, like, or chatting it through with a friend, or yeah, going to therapy. Like, I think time is also, yeah, always one of those things that we need.
Was it kind of the talk therapy that worked for you in that time, to just sit with someone and share what was going on for you? And like you say, do those things, cry, and that's kind of the method, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to process the grief that I was experiencing and what that particular pregnancy had meant to me, that was a big one for me. And yeah, so to talk through what that meant for me, to also look at what that meant of my expectations of other people, and have a lot of validation and nurturing, but some gentle challenging around like what I expect of people. Yeah, I don't know who said it, but there's that like quote that expectations are like the killer of relationships. And I think like it's okay to have expectations in relationships to a healthy extent, but we can never expect someone to be everything to each of us. Yeah, actually, like I heard someone, I can't even remember who it is, but I heard someone speak once, and he was, I'm trying to remember if it was on a podcast or what it was, but he was talking about your kids, and he literally said this quote, "Parents, you will never be enough for your kids." And I was like, oh, like, it's so horrible to say. And he was like, because you were never meant to be, like, one person is never meant to be everything to someone else. And like, yeah, we require like other people and resources and like, yeah, supports, right? To be our best selves. Like we can never, just like me now as a therapist has to remind myself, I can't be everything to my clients. Like I can be with them in their sadness or their grief or anxiety or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, I can't be the one to heal them. Like that's a lot of pressure to put on myself, and I can't be everything to them, right? They also have to find those resources outside of me too. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's just a good reminder on both sides.
It sounds kind of like a lonely time, like, because before the miscarriage, like you were still struggling with the first, well, you kind of had struggled with the first son, right? And all the expectations and all the pressures and everything's on you, and you have to do all these things, and then like that's got to feel lonely, and then kind of transitioning into that loneliness, and then needing something and kind of unable to obtain it, right?
Totally,
and
yeah.
just like, yeah, it sounds quite lonely. And
yeah, it can be very lonely. And then I also have to ask myself the question, like, am I also like doing that to myself too? Because like I said, in that struggle, like how it was so evident that I was not doing well, but I was like, I had kind of bubbled myself off from the world too. Yeah, because it's vulnerable to reach out and to tell family or friends that you're struggling, and there's this like part of me that doesn't want people to worry about me. That's always been a very strong part of me that's like, you need to like show everybody you're capable and you've got this. And yeah, that goes way back, but like I think, yeah, to be okay accepting help, and also like verbalizing that you need help, because people aren't mind readers, and yeah, like people might not know what you're experiencing if you're not willing to open that door too, right? So there were definitely moments that were lonely, for sure, but I also know like, yeah, it can be really tempting to also kind of isolate yourself when you're struggling, and versus,
which is lonely in itself, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's hard to like, I always say to people, it's hard to see out of the cave when you're in it. Like, you gotta walk closer to the entrance of the cave, and then you realize like how far in you are. Like, Yeah, when you're like,
Hindsight's everything sometimes, hey?
Totally,
Looking back and like, wow, that was deeper than I thought. Was there a moment for you where you felt like you were coming out the cave, that you were starting to feel a little bit more like yourself? And
yeah, definitely. I think as my son got a little older, and then eventually I did have another child, like as time kind of went on, and yeah, when did I start to feel like myself? That's a really good question. I think actually, like, yeah, I've been in these early motherhood years for like 5.5 years now. And I think when my kids, maybe when the youngest hit 2, like, if I'm being really honest, there were some glimpses of hope. And also I had better resources at that point. But yeah, I think like it's just so hard. Like you're never getting a full night of sleep. Like you always have somebody who needs you. You always have these little people with big demands. They also like, you learn so quickly in parenting what your triggers are that you didn't even know were there. Like when they whine, why do I get so triggered by that? Like what's that about? Like they're just babies who need me. So why am I like reacting like, oh, but yeah, there's like reasons behind that, right? So again, like that self-compassion piece of like, this is like telling me something about my own nervous system that I maybe didn't experience or need to kind of regulate. But yeah, I think once my youngest kind of turned that corner, so it wasn't even that long ago, I started to feel a little more human again. I think this is common for a lot of moms when you kind of hit the stage where you feel like your kids aren't so fragile and you can actually leave them with people that you trust who will take care of them, that like you don't have to be everything to them. And I think for me also recognizing how I wasn't built to be a stay-at-home mom, like I think stay-at-home moms are absolutely amazing and it's incredible when that kind of becomes their life. But for me, like I also needed that balance of some sort of professional fulfillment too. So also going back into the workforce between the kids and also after my daughter was 1 or even younger than that was big for me, just to have my own sense of fulfillment and colleague relationships and something that was for me like my own passions to explore versus just about being a parent. And that's why like when you ask me to tell you who I am, I'm like, I never just want to say like, oh, I'm a therapist or oh, I'm a mom, because like, yeah, like our identity is never just like our job or being a parent or whatever it is that we're really good at. Like it's so much more than that. So yeah, so I think like definitely I felt more and more like myself the older my kids get. Like I know a lot of moms love those really early years, but I think even more from the people I've talked to love when your kids get a little bit older and sturdier and like they still need you, but you feel like you can do things that you used to love to do and start investing in yourself a little bit again. And yeah.
What was it like for you when you did decide to go back to work? Did you have a critical voice there about any of that? Like I feel like, I don't really know because I don't personally have kids, but I feel like there is always like a lot of judgment on moms, right?
Oh,
and it's just like
so
sometimes
much.
it's just like will never get it right. Staying at home, going back to work, doing it this way, doing it that way, deciding for kids, deciding against kids. Like it's just like it never ends.
So much
and the
pressure
for women
to make the right choice.
It's like it's impossible.
Yeah.
We'll never get it right for somebody, right?
And you may never know what the right choice is, right? Because there could be like 15 different right choices for one person, right? And that like mom guilt runs deep anytime you leave your kids. Like anytime I have to go back to work in the afternoon when I feel like I should be home with them, right? But I think as I've like worked through my own mom guilt part and those blocks that I have, it's also been discovering how much more fulfilled as a human being I feel, which then like trickles down to my kids and my friendships and my like husband and everything. When I am more me, like that's also better for them. And I think there's something so valuable, and I really want working moms to hear this, in having an identity that's separate from your kids and being able to model that to them and not feel guilty about that. Yeah, because I think like your kids are probably really proud of you for doing whatever it is you're doing, right? And the world, you can love your kids, they can be like your number one priority, or they can be one of the biggest things in the world to you, but you can also, the world doesn't have to revolve around them, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's also a really healthy lesson for kids to know too, like that, like, you're deeply loved and like I'm here for you and you're a big priority for me, but I also have other things in my life that make me who I am, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're so right. Like, there's so much shame put on any type of mom or any type of woman, whether you decide to have kids or not, or if you can even have kids or not, right?
What age you are when you have kids.
Exactly. What age you are. Exactly. Am I too old? If I'm too old, none of like, yeah, like I'm considered a geriatric mom, or if I'm too young, everyone looks down on me because I'm not prepared. Like, it's just, it's too much. Or if you choose to stay at home, it's like, oh, well, you don't have a job or career, but like, that's also like such important work that you're doing in the home. And yeah, and then if you go to work, like, oh, you're like leaving your kids like in the care of someone else. I just think all these narratives that like create judgment and shame are just so dangerous. And I think at the end of the day, people just need to do what works best for them and their families, and it's okay to like make mistakes along the way and learn what you need and do some trial and error of finding what your balance is going to be. Yeah, because we might never know what the perfect choice is, and I think just to trust that it's going to be okay, like, yeah, at the end of the day.
So kind of swinging it back to self-compassion and being able to provide that for yourself now, like what would you say to you back then? Like, what would that sound like?
Good question. Yeah. Oh, I think I would want to say I can see why you're doing what you're doing, like, because I think there's a huge piece of sitting with like old versions of us and being like, I get it, like this is really hard what you're going through, and then I think also, yeah, that piece of like, it's okay to reach out for help, and to trust yourself when you don't feel like yourself. Like, I think sometimes when we struggle, it's easy to be like, is this bad enough to get help? Is this bad enough to go to a counselor? Is this bad enough to go on antidepressants or whatever it is? Like, we question that. I know I do. But to be like, you don't feel like yourself. And like, that's a good enough sign that it's time to reach out. Like, you don't have to wait like a week or two and see if it normalizes. Like, it's okay to just reach out. And like, that might be vulnerable, but it's so worth it. Yeah, so I would just, but like looking back on that old part of me, I would just have so much compassion for her and what she was going through at the time, because it was just survival mode. Like, I just want to give her a hug and be like, it's okay. And it gets easier, it gets better. And like, eventually you start to feel like yourself again. Like, yeah, and sometimes that does require some help along the way, and that's okay. Like, no matter who you are, like, yeah. Yeah.
It's so nice that you can get to that place after kind of all the trial of it and all the emotion and the journey of it. You can end up at the place where you can say, it's okay, I get it. And totally get it.
Totally. And that's like also what I want for my clients, to not look back on old versions of them and be like, oh, why did I relapse, or why did I yell at my kids, or why did I do this, or like judge that. I mean, like, yeah, like, instead just to be like, yeah, you were struggling and that was really hard what just happened, or like what you were going through, and like, I get it, it makes sense. Like, I'm really like a big proponent of this like field of psychology or like counseling called IFS, which stands for Internal Family Systems. And it's created by this psychologist named Richard Schwartz, and he like wrote this book called No Bad Parts. So like the idea that every version of us that was coping with something at some point, like none of these versions of us were doing that to try to damage ourselves or to try to create some sort of problem. They were all just trying to cope with something, and trying to either protect our system in some way or serve some sort of role for us. So I think to look back on, yeah, every part of myself with that same kind of compassion, like, yeah, there's a reason you did what you did at the time. And yeah, it doesn't mean that you don't grow and learn ways of functioning that make more sense or that are better, but yeah, I think that self-compassion piece is like huge, and it's also very healing to be able to give that to the old parts of you that, that were
It
stuck
feels like
in
almost
that.
like the gateway, like it's
Totally.
like the thing that will allow you to get from there to here, like
Yeah.
to a better place, right? You have to just kind of be
Totally.
like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because if you just beat yourself up, or you say,
Yeah.
like if you stay in the cycle of, look at you, you're doing this, you're saying that, like then
Yeah.
you'll never probably exit into the other side of like, I can breathe. I'm not that
Exactly.
bad.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Totally. And like shame just like exasperates the need for coping or symptoms, right? Like when we shame ourselves, that doesn't help at all. Like,
No.
yeah, nobody grows in shame. Like we grow in compassion and nurturing, and yeah.
I really appreciate what you shared, and I feel like, you know, even though there's this big piece of like being a mom and the experience in that, I think it translates so well to like just anything, right? And just that experience of self-compassion and, you know, the critical voice and depression and things like that that, you know, are not foreign to many of us. And, you know, the mere fact of telling ourselves that it's okay and reaching out for help is, you know, key and essential, and
Totally.
we deserve it, right? And
Yeah.
we deserve it sounds almost, I don't know, but
Yeah.
we are allowed. We're
Yeah.
okay to get help, and
Yeah, we're the only ones who can do it for ourselves. Like I'm the
Yeah.
only one who can take care of me at the end of the day, right? So
you found that out when your
Yeah.
friends weren't coming by and no one was calling. It was like, talk to me. Yeah, another thing.
Yeah. Like people
Yeah.
can love us and support us, but we do need to be the ones to, yeah, take care of us at the end of the day and do what's best for ourselves. And only we also know what that is too, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you wanted to share that you haven't got the chance to?
Ooh, good question. I think just, I think like I always just go back to like counseling is for everybody. Like, and if there's like one message, and I think that's like what's so exciting about this like new like day and age is like more people are accessing counseling, but like it's for everybody. It doesn't matter what age you are. Like, yeah, I don't know. So many like people, I think, like as they get later on in the years are like, you know, I've lived my life. There's no point dwelling. But it's like, do you want the last, whatever, like 10, 15 years of your life to be how they've been? Or do you want them to be really great because they can? So I think counseling is for people no matter what your age or gender or race or anything is. And I think especially that message of even if you're a professional and you think you should know how you're supposed to be, or you think you have all the tools and resources to take care of yourself, like it's still okay to reach out for help. Yeah, like it doesn't do anyone a service when you try to keep yourself locked up and keep those problems bottled up. Like, yeah, anybody can reach out for help. It doesn't matter who you are. And yeah.
It's a good message even for me, right? I am
Yeah.
just even being a professional in the community, I sometimes think, wow, I like to relate to the message of, I should have this figured out. I should not be struggling with this. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I wonder if other people who are doing this job are struggling with this, and
Right.
they're probably not, and it's just me, and something's wrong with me, and you
Yeah.
know, but I'm sure if I just took the time to sit with someone and say, this is what I'm thinking, they were like, you're okay, and I was like, great.
Totally.
But yeah, it's
Yeah.
easy to get in your head, and it's, I think when you do have some sort of, I think it's hard for anybody,
Yeah.
that's for sure. But I guess there's this piece where you are maybe going to feel more exposed sometimes than
Totally.
others, right?
Yeah.
And living in Cranbrook in a small community, it sometimes, yeah, you don't want to be exposed, right? You don't feel very anonymous sometimes.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, because I think the more, like the longer I've sat in like the therapist chair, like the more diversity I've had, like the privilege of getting to see, right? Like everything from like the stay-at-home moms to like nurses and teachers and physicians, real estate agents, like so many different professionals and also unemployed people too. Like we see it all. And like I think the core of it is that like everybody struggles. Like nobody gets through life without some sort of challenge. Like life is hard, and no matter who you are, like there's going to be some sort of struggle along the way. So yeah, like anybody can reach out. Yeah, I think that's like the big message, I think, for me, is to not be afraid to do it, and in whatever capacity that means.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on the
Yeah,
podcast and
thank you for
sharing a bit of
having me.
yourself. And
Yeah.
I always think, like, if it helps one person, then it's done its job. That's kind of
Yeah.
always been my message, I guess. And I know it's helped me today. So thank you. And
Yeah, thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was really great to do this.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
Emily.
Thanks, Jackie.
Hey, I'm Morgan. I'm the producer of the Hold On to Your Heart Project podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you'd like to find out more about what we're all about and check out other episodes, you can find us at holdontoyourheartproject.com or on YouTube and Instagram at Hold On to Your Heart Project. Thanks for stopping by.